somehow we go from here...
What do I want to see them for? What am I, in trouble?
...to here.
We can discuss my honorarium over dinner and champagne tonight. Your treat. Yes.
At some point during one of my 4,000 or so viewings of the Indiana Jones movies, I noticed something really interesting about the first and third movies, Raiders of the Lost Ark and Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Something you probably noticed too if you've watched these movies. After the action scene that opens each movie, the second scene in each takes place in a classroom at a college where Indiana is a professor of archaeology. He receives a visit from college museum curator Marcus Brody, and they discuss the important historic artifact that belongs in a museum that Indy was trying to obtain in the opening scene. And these scenes are strikingly similar, like same shot selection and camera movement similar. This is interesting movie trivia in itself, in that it's a fun and tasteful choice by the filmmakers. A bit of a pre-Easter egg era Easter egg. Cool if you notice, but not really essential to understanding the central plot. The scene also reaffirms that Indy is an intellectual and academic as well as an adventurer. And also...
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme, every stanza kind of rhymes with the last one.
But adding more depth and nuance to the scenes are the differences between the two. And being small parts of larger and different stories, these scenes do have differences, particularly regarding the Indiana Jones character himself. He's different. Somehow we go from here...
What do I want to see them for? What am I, in trouble?
...to here.
We can discuss my honorarium over dinner and champagne tonight. Your treat. Yes.
But how? And why? And what is Marcus Brody doing with that apple? And having a lifelong and bottomless love and curiosity for movies and storytelling, I always wanted to check this out further. And, well, I just started this YouTube channel, and so I thought, I'm going to do some research. I'm going to dig a little deeper. And so I looked it up on YouTube. And to my genuine surprise, it appears that no one has done a side-by-side comparison of these classroom scenes before. At least not done so and then posted it on YouTube publicly. So I thought I'd fix that. And that's what we're going to do in this video. First, a side-by-side run-through to highlight the similarities between these scenes, kind of a bird's-eye view. And then after that, we're going to slow it down, we're going to point out the differences, and talk about what they mean. So, that's the plan. And now, the little hand says it's time to rock and roll. And right off the bat, we've got very similar exterior shots of the college. And again, both of these scenes follow an opening action scene. And the events of both of those opening action scenes, if we were to paint them with broad strokes, could be described like this. Indiana Jones approaches and enters a cave with a sidekick. He locates an important historic artifact that belongs in a museum, leaves the cave with the artifact but not the sidekick, loses the artifact to a fellow adventurer, makes a run for it, and gets his hat soaking wet. Of course, there's more to each scene than that, and in Last Crusade, the action continues on in 1938 off the Portuguese coast. But that is an appropriate description of both of those opening action scenes that lead into this moment here, where both classroom scenes open with a jib, or crane, shot establishing the exterior of the college. And then we cut right to a close-up of Indiana's hand, writing on a chalkboard, or blackboard, depending on where you grew up. While speaking, he turns to face the class. We see the swooning faces of students as we pan from left to right across the classroom. Marcus Brody approaches from down the hallway, peers inside the classroom. He enters the classroom and then takes a spot leaning against the wall. Indy sees Marcus and continues his lecture, which lasts longer in Raiders, so I've sped up that part here. The bell rings and the students file out of the classroom as Indy watches them go. Marcus approaches Indy, and they discuss the important historic artifact that belongs in a museum that Indy was trying to obtain in the opening scene. And then Marcus interacts with a green object. And it's right here that Marcus straight up steals Indiana Jones's apple. What I think actually is going on here, because it looks like Marcus picks up the apple, considers taking a bite out of it, and then changes his mind and throws it in his pocket. What I think actually happened here was the performer playing the student put the apple on the desk. The apple looked like it was going to fall off the desk. It's wobbling there if you look closely. So Denholm Elliott, the actor playing Brody, consummate professional, sees the apple might fall off the desk, prepares to catch it in case it does. It doesn't, but to allow for the gesture that he made and continuing the scene, he picks it up to explain why his hand is out. And then, of course, he can't take a bite out of the apple because it would ruin the scene, so he just puts it in his pocket. And I love that this was probably an accident, but Spielberg and editor Michael Kahn thought that this just worked and made sense, that they thought, you know what, it's a mistake, but it makes sense. It's a funny little sight gag. If people catch it, great. If not, nobody's going to miss a thing. So anyway, continuing on, Marcus interacts with an object here. There's a long two-shot while the men speak with each other. Finally, Indy gathers his things and they leave the classroom.
We can discuss my honorarium over dinner and champagne.
What am I, in trouble?
Your treat.
Yes.
So there we can see from that kind of bird's eye view how similar these scenes are. Besides the lecture and the following conversation between Marcus and Indy lasting longer, the scenes are remarkably similar. But again, if we slow it down and we start taking a closer look, then we start seeing some pretty glaring differences. And again, most of the differences that we're going to see are changes in Indiana's behavior. I will note quickly, too, that chronologically in the Indiana Jones canon, the second movie, Temple of Doom, is actually a prequel to the first, as it takes place in 1935. Raiders takes place in 1936, and Last Crusade takes place in 1938. After the prologue set in 1912. So, in a way, Last Crusade is as much a direct sequel to Raiders of the Lost Ark as is Temple of Doom. All right, so we're going to jump back here to the crane shot, the establishing exterior shot of the college. And with this very first shot, we actually get two differences. First is the cut to the exterior shot. In Raiders, we get a hard cut, and in Last Crusade, it's a dissolved transition. Secondly, the colleges are different, and I am embarrassed to admit how many years it took me to notice this. To be fair, in my defense, there's no title card or sign on the lawn telling us where this is. But these are actually different colleges. In Raiders, Indy is teaching at Marshall College, which was named after producer and longtime Spielberg collaborator Frank Marshall. In Last Crusade, Indy teaches at Barnett College, having taken a job there in between the events of Raiders of the Lost Ark in 1936 and The Last Crusade in 1938. When we cut to Indiana writing on the chalkboard, we see that in Raiders, he double-checks his spelling, while in Last Crusade, not only does he not double-check his spelling, but he emphatically underlines the word. So already, just from this first shot, we can see the difference and how much more assertive Indiana is in Last Crusade to the Indian Raiders. And this confidence, or lack thereof, manifests itself in his voice as well. In Raiders, if we take a listen, we can hear him stumble over the word passage as he delivers his lecture.
It contains a central passage and 3 chambers or 6.
But in Last Crusade, he speaks clearly with resonance in his voice, with authority, with assertiveness.
If it's truth you're interested in, Dr. Tyree's philosophy class is right down the hall.
And then he also seems flustered when Marcus Brody walks in Raiders. It throws him off. He takes a beat out of his lecture.
This site also demonstrates one of the great dangers of archaeology, not the life and limb.
And then continues. Whereas in Last Crusade, it's almost like he's expecting, like he's waiting for Marcus Brody to show up. And he is, really. But he's not thrown off by it. He's unfazed in Last Crusade. Again, more in control of himself, his environment. And in Raiders, while Indy is lecturing, a girl, one of his female students, flashes to him a message written on her eyelids that spells out, "Love you." Now he sees this, and it so throws him that he fully takes like a beat and a half out of his lecture to kind of like gawk awkwardly at this girl before he continues on. Again, very distracted, very unfocused. He's not in control of the situation. In The Last Crusade, it's not like there's a girl that flashes him, this sign or whatever, but even though he doesn't get the distraction, we get the feeling from this Indiana, like this guy lecturing, that he's not going to be fazed. That if some girl did that, he probably wouldn't even notice because he's more focused on delivering the words that he has to say, the message that he has through the words that he has to say. So again, much more confident Indy in The Last Crusade. And we also get a camera angle and position in Raiders that we don't get in Last Crusade. In Raiders, when Indy is staring at the girl's eyelids, the camera is on the window side of Indy's desk. We get a POV shot, almost, from the girl, and we're on the window side of Indy's desk there. We don't get that camera angle from the Last Crusade scene in the classroom here. We always stay on the door side. So kind of a small thing there, but just there was never any camera set up, at least not one that they used any shots from in The Last Crusade, but we do flip to the other side there. And as we continue, Indy, again with his behavior here in Raiders, he awkwardly ends his lecture. It's like the bell rings and it's like he had no idea it was going to happen. And he responds like this.
Any questions, then? No, okay, that's it for the day, then. Don't forget, Michelson, chapters 4 and 5 for next time. And I will be in my office on Thursday, but not Wednesday.
He's just shouting stuff at his students as they file noisily out of the classroom. So again, it's like he's totally unprepared. Whereas in Last Crusade, Indy does still lecture right up until the bell, but again, it's not like it phases him. Like he wraps up his lecture, but he does it succinctly and gives clear directions to his students who still file noisily out of the classroom.
Next week, Egyptology, starting with the excavation of New Crates by Flinders Petrie in 1885. I will be in my office if anybody's got any problems for the next hour and a half.
Now, when Marcus Brody walks up, in both scenes, Indiana says something to Marcus. And what he says is the first most telling clue as to why Indy seems different between these scenes. In Raiders, Marcus walks up and Indiana says this.
I had it, Marcus. I had it in my hand.
Meaning he doesn't have it. He didn't get it. He failed. But in Last Crusade, Marcus walks up and Indiana says this.
Marcus, I did it.
You've got it.
Marcus, I did it. And that's it. We could probably just end the video right there. I mean, that's the difference, right? Is that in Raiders he didn't do it, and in The Last Crusade he did do it. That was easier than I thought it was going to be. Wow. All right, well, I don't know. I mean, he did it, and I get how getting the artifact versus not getting the artifact is definitely going to change your mood, but this seems more than just sad, empty-handed Indy and yay, I got it, Indy.
Yay!
Like, this seems deeper. The next thing Indiana says to Marcus is,
You know how long I've been looking for that?
and Marcus says,
All your life.
All my life.
Well done, Indy. Very well done indeed.
the fact that Marcus knows this underscores and highlights the significance of what this artifact means for Indiana. Because Indiana has obviously told Marcus about this artifact and how he's been looking for it all of his life. But we will talk about that in a moment because there is a lot behind this. And here we've got a similarity within a difference, or a difference within a similarity. Again, we see here Marcus steals Indiana's apple. It's a green apple. In Last Crusade, Indiana hands Marcus an object wrapped in a green cloth, which Marcus unwraps to find the Cross of Coronado. And then in Raiders, when we slow down that part that I had sped up, that conversation between Marcus and Indiana sounds like a junkie.
It's beautiful, Marcus. I can get it. I got it all figured out. There's no one place you can sell it, Marrakesh. I need $2,000. Listen to me, old boy. I brought some people to see you. Look, I got these pieces. They're good pieces, Marcus. Look.
He's brought stuff back from South America with him. Like, he didn't get the golden idol of fertility of the Chachapoyan people of Peru, but, he did bring stuff back. And Marcus is obviously interested in this stuff because, Indy doesn't just bring back any old crap.
Questions asked, yes, they are nice. They're worth at least the price of a ticket to Marrakesh.
But Indiana's, he's obviously not satisfied. He's like, how much money can I get from this for my next adventure? In Last Crusade, Indy's smooth. You see him just gracefully take his glasses off, fold them up, put them in his jacket pocket. He seems calm. He seems at peace. He's smiling. And Marcus says,
Well done, Indy. Very well done indeed.
While unable to take his eyes off the artifact. And in Raiders, when Marcus turns the subject back to the guys, he starts leading the way out of the classroom, and Indy gathers his stuff. He's got several tubes of rolled up paper and books in his briefcase under his arm as he's chasing after Marcus, saying,
Well, what do I want to see them for? What am I, in trouble?
Whereas in the Last Crusade, Indy leads the way out of the classroom with Marcus following behind. Indy just kind of casually tosses out there,
We can discuss my honorarium over dinner and champagne tonight. Your treat.
and Marcus, still so enthralled with his artifact, is just like,
Yes.
So as we have hopefully illustrated, although these two classroom scenes do seem very similar on the surface, they are in fact quite different, particularly with the Indiana Jones character. In Raiders, Indy is chaotic. He is ill-prepared. He seems desperate. In The Last Crusade, Indiana is much more relaxed. He seems at peace. He's calmer. He seems as though he's accomplished something. Now, on the surface, these differences can be explained as simply as Indiana got the artifact in one movie and he didn't get it in the other. But it's so much more than that. It's obviously so much more than that. It's more than just having gotten the artifact in the third movie. It's about what the artifact represents for Indy. And it's about so much more than that even. We're going to break down how many layers this opening action scene in The Last Crusade actually has and the impact it has on the rest of the story. Often, opening action scenes are there just to tell a little bit of story, but mostly just to get the audience's heart rate going. And that is pretty much what's going on in Raiders of the Lost Ark. That, and it's an introduction, a fantastic introduction to the character. In The Last Crusade, this is like a little microcosm of the entire Indiana Jones story. So that opening actioner in The Last Crusade, it takes place in two different years, 1912 and 1938. In 1912, Indiana Jones, young Indy, or Henry Jones Jr., is on a Boy Scout expedition when he comes across some Tomb Raiders for hire who are stealing an important historic artifact that belongs in a museum, the Cross of Coronado. He steals it from them and tries to turn it into the proper authorities, namely the sheriff, who then betrays Indiana, and he loses the artifact. Then we cut to later in the same opening action scene. It's 1938, and Indiana Jones is getting that Cross of Coronado back. Now, it would be really easy to think of that whole opening action scene as like a flashback or just a prologue to give us some information. But I think this is actually a memory. I think that segment in 1912, I think that was actually a memory. I think this is actually what Harrison Ford, Indiana Jones, is thinking about in this moment right here on the boat in 1938. And I think it's important that there's a distinction, that it's not just a flashback, that he's remembering this, because what he's remembering here is how all of this started, and not just how the Cross of Coronado thread started, but how Indiana Jones started. Because in the 1912 segment, before young Indy finds the Cross of Coronado, he's just Henry Jones Jr. And when he loses the artifact in the opening scene, it's likely this is the first time that Henry Jones Jr. has been outmaneuvered, beaten, disappointed, betrayed by corrupt people, by people playing dirty games. And it starts with the sheriff right here, who is clearly getting paid by this guy, whose name is Panama Hat. Literally, his name is Panama Hat in the credits. This is the first guy behind the guy that Indy has had to deal with. And he's not a good guy. This guy, Panama Hat, dressed all in white, which is kind of ironic, a bit of a symbological inversion there, because white is typically reserved for the good guys, and dark or black reserved for the bad guys. But we've got Indiana and this guy, Fedora, wearing dark hats. So again, in this moment, young Indy has lost more than just the Cross of Coronado, right? He's lost a large part of his innocence, really. You know, the sheriff and Panama Hat here have just ripped his world open. So it's a tough but valuable lesson for young Indy, for Henry Jones Jr. And then in walks this guy whose name is Fedora. His name is literally Fedora in the credits. So we've got Panama Hat and we've got Fedora, who is obviously some sort of quasi-Indiana Jones. He's got the jacket, he's got the hat, he's an adventurer, he's ruggedly handsome. I mean, he's not Harrison Ford, ruggedly handsome, but he's a good-looking guy. He walks in and he's basically saying to Indy, look, we're not like these guys, right? You and I, we're the adventurers. We're the ones who go out and get the dirt under our fingernails. We just love this stuff. And he leans in and says to him,
You lost today, kid. But it doesn't mean you have to like it.
and then he gives him his hat, right? This moment right here when, all right, first of all, this is one of the greatest moments in cinema history. When young Indy, River Phoenix, dips his head down and we smash cut to 1938 and Harrison Ford, Indiana Jones lifts his head and he's smiling, letting us know that there is nowhere else in the world that he would rather be than on this boat in the pouring rain. I don't know how many times, I have watched this probably 1,000 times. And when we cut and John Williams' score swells and Harrison Ford has that smile on his face, I still get chills. And it's so brilliant because it's a combination of a match cut and a smash cut. It's a match cut because we're cutting from one scene to another with a common element. In this case, obviously, it's the hat. It's a smash cut because we are cutting abruptly from one scene to another. These scenes are completely different. We're going from the deserts of Utah in 1912 to a boat in the pouring rain 26 years later. So this combination of match cut, smash cut, John Williams' score, Douglas Slocum's cinematography, Michael Kahn's editing, it's just pure movie gold right here. So anyway, in this moment, when Fedora takes his hat off and he puts it on young Indy, he puts it on Henry Jones Jr. And what he does here is he knights Indy. I mean, that's what happens, right? This is a movie about the Holy Grail and knights. And when Henry Jones Jr. dips his head down and Fedora takes his hat off and puts it on Indy's head, he is knighting Henry Jones Jr. And Henry Jones Jr. raises his head, Indiana Jones. So I would argue that this is the moment that the Indiana Jones character, or more accurately, the Indiana Jones persona, is born. And he's about to reach the culmination, the climax of his arc off the Portuguese coast in 1938. And that's what Harrison Ford Indiana Jones is thinking about right here. So when we transition back to the classroom, I would argue that we are now watching Henry Jones Jr. again. But the thing is, it's deeper than that. It's not just about the artifact, and it's not just about being exposed to the corruption of the world for the first time. Right? That scene, that memory from 1912, is a memory that also happens to involve his father, albeit indirectly, who we only see in glimpses. We see his hand, we hear his voice.
Junior!
And it can feel like it is just an introduction to the character of Indiana Jones's father, but it's not. It's an introduction to an impression of, or an idea of, how Indiana Jones feels about his father. And the impression that we get as the audience is that his father was inattentive, stern, probably had really high standards for Indiana. And it's those general impressions that I believe Indiana feels lingering once the high of reclaiming the artifact has worn off. And that's what he's feeling in the scene in the classroom in Last Crusade.
You know how long I've been looking for that?
All your life?
All my life.
Well done, Indy. Very well done indeed.
It's not a memory about his father. It's a memory that includes his father. And that opened up some stuff for Indiana when he closed the storyline with the Cross of Coronado. So, having wrapped up his Indiana Jones persona storyline, Henry Jones Jr. is now trying to fix things that were broken before he became Indiana Jones. Things that were broken between him and his father, those impressions that we got from the opening scene. Remember, in just a couple of minutes of screen time, Indiana Jones is going to turn down the chance to look for the Holy Grail. This character, Mr. Donovan, comes in, and he has some, for what in a movie is pretty credible evidence of the Holy Grail. He offers Indiana Jones the opportunity to look for the Holy Grail, and Indiana Jones turns it down. I'm going to repeat that. Indiana Jones turns down the opportunity to go look for the Holy Grail. It's not until the search becomes about looking for his father does he agree to accept. And he does. And Henry Jones Jr. goes on an adventure searching for his father and answers and resolution to issues with the relationship with his father. And how does he do that? That, my friends, is a topic for a different video. To wrap up this video, why does Indiana seem different between the classroom scenes in Raiders and The Last Crusade? Well, the simple answer is he didn't get the artifact in one and he did get it in the other. The not-so-simple answer is that Indiana Jones had lost a large part of his innocence before the events of Raiders of the Lost Ark, and a lot of it was restored. He was able to put it back in order to some degree when he got the artifact back in the third movie. And the complicated way of explaining the difference between Indiana Jones in the first and third movies is daddy issues. Thanks for watching the video, especially thanks if you've watched this far. I hope you've enjoyed it. We'll see you in the next one.